Okay, it's your boy Wrangle, and this is a video where I'm gonna go over where I'm at with the geochemical cycle, as well as give some art direction to our texturing artists so that they're not just sitting around waiting for us to have something for them to texture. Okay, so first of all, when I first started working on this game, as you know, it was just gonna be wolf, rabbit, right? And then Neko came in and said, hey, what if we also did a bunch of cool physical simulations, right? And you would think between those two things, we would have a fully functioning ecological simulation, right? Well, not quite. See, in order to have that, we actually need to have the third pillar, which is animals returning to the earth. And the good news is each one of these arrows here is modular. So if you have one functioning tree, then you can make endless variations on it, right? The bad news is this process overall is not modular. You need to have at least one representative member for each of these arrows before you really have a proper functioning ecological simulation. And where it gets tricky is the decomposition. When animals die and decompose, some minerals get returned into the earth, while other minerals get put into the air. And then later, the plants will recombine those terrestrial minerals with those airborne minerals to create new organic matter, right? So in order to really keep track of all that, we need to do a little chemistry. And in theory, we could make a game that only has 4 elements, right? We can have organics, minerals, gases, and water, call it a day. That would technically work, but I think we all know it wouldn't really be satisfying, right? Because we want players to be able to smelt iron from iron ore, and they're not going to be able to do that if the game can't tell the difference between iron ore and dirt, right? So I've been doing a little chemistry. And this is not my chart, by the way. So this is what we call the lava train, or I call it the lava train. Anyway, basically, when a mineral gets hot enough, it's going to melt and form a container called lava. Lava is allowed to hold different minerals depending on its temperature. So as it cools down, the game is going to check and see, okay, is this cold enough for these different minerals to start getting deposited, right? I call it the lava train because it's almost like these minerals are saying, okay, this is my stop. I'm going to hop off now. Once it creates a rock, it's going to do a texture lookup, right? So if the composition of the deposited rock is primarily silicate, it's going to say, okay, this is 70% silicate and 10% alkali metals. That's rhyolite, okay? And if you're wondering where granite is on this chart, by the way, granite is actually a plutonic rock, which means it cools down slowly and has large grain sizes. If it cools down more quickly, it becomes rhyolite, which is the aphantic version. And if it cools down really quickly, then it becomes glass, aka obsidian, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a lava train chart that has one of these for every major mineral that a rock could be predominantly made of. And that's just going to be the lava train. Okay, then we got to do other stuff. Now, you'd think that I would be doing the soil chart first because that's kind of, the thing that plants grow in, right? It's pretty central to the ecology. But first of all, I don't think it matters which order these different parts of the chart get made in because, like I said, it's not modular, right? Either it works or it doesn't. Now that said, we do have some good news, and that is that I was very quickly able to find something called the Unified Soil Classification System. This is a closed chart that perfectly maps out all the different soil types based on their composition. There is just one little question here, though. If you're familiar with Vintage Story or Minecraft, you may be familiar with peat or podzol, respectively. Those are both real soil types that are not on this chart. That's because this chart is for engineers. Engineers don't actually care about the mineral composition of the soil. They only care about its engineering properties. And those are determined by grain size. That's right, folks. Sand can be made out of anything. It's just a grain size. So we did another classification system. The good news is there is this thing called the World Reference Base for soil resources. That's where peat and podzol come from, actually. It even has a nice, tidy 32 soils for us to choose from. Unfortunately, this chart isn't going to work for us either. And to understand why, let's take a quick look at the cross-section for podzol. Fun fact about the word podzol, by the way, it actually comes from the Russian word for under ash. That's because when Russian peasants would till this soil, they would turn up this ashy underlayer. So what's going on here is that the plants that grow in this topsoil, they produce something called humic acid. So when it rains, that rain becomes acidic and it leaches the minerals out of this layer here and deposits them into this lower layer. That's what creates this ashy appearance. These layers are called horizons, by the way. And this third horizon down here, that's clay. Uh-oh. Clay is its own block type. So yeah, this chart here doesn't really refer to individual materials so much as collections of materials that are somewhat common, right? In fact, one of the categories in this book is anthracol, which is any soil that has a history of being tilled. So when those Russian peasants till podzol, it becomes anthracol. If you tilled peat, it would also become anthracol, even though podzol and peat have different compositions, right? So what we really need is a chart that allows us to track the composition of these individual layers, right? Well, get you Lord of the Rings memes ready, because to my knowledge, there is no such chart. Well, the good news is I do have a plan for getting this worked out. So, in real life and in our game, soil is composed of minerals, gases, water, and organic material, okay? So each one of these is basically a container that contains different stuff. For example, the minerals we kind of already talked about, right? Remember that lava train from earlier? After this lava train turns into igneous rock, that igneous rock gets turned into a type of container called sediment. That sediment is the mineral component of soils, right? So after I finish all of these different subcharts, then they're all going to fit together into a meta container called soil. And at that point, we'll have a biogeochemical chart. So, you ready to see where I'm at in this process? That's right, folks. This chart has a very long way to go. But once it is done, we're going to be able to plug it into that Voxel simulator calculator thingy that Neko is working on, right? So, now's the part of the video where I give a little art direction.
Envision a world where we seize our destiny for ourselves and get in the comments!
Get in the comments.